Good afternoon, Valeriy Viktorovich. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, dear viewers, audio listeners, and comrades in the studio. Today is May 13, 2024.
На прошлой неделе произошли два события, имеющие общемировое значение. Это
Last week, two significant events occurred universally: the inauguration of the President of Russia and the parade commemorating the 79th anniversary of victory in the Great Patriotic War.
И хотя инаугурация состоялась раньше, чем парад, начнем именно с парада Победы.
Let's start by discussing the victory parade before moving on to the inauguration. Please share your thoughts on the symbolic content of the parade and its universal significance.
Казалось бы, действительно, а в чем может быть мировое значение победы России, Советского Союза в Великой Отечественной войне над Третьим Рейхом, если идет переписывание мировой истории?
Indeed, what is the global significance of the USSR Russia's victory in the Great Patriotic War over the Third Reich if the West, in rewriting world history, is downplaying the Soviet Union's victory and excluding modern Russia from the list of victorious countries? That is, the West does not acknowledge fascism within itself. While the Third Reich was defeated, Germany is now experiencing a resurgence and denying historical responsibility. But Russia, once labeled as a regional power, held its parade. What impact could this have on a global scale? What conclusions could the world draw from observing this event?
Вот такие вещи, как парад, относятся к очень знаковым событиям, которые обладают глубоким символизмом.
Events like parades are very significant as they hold deep symbolism.
Которое называется «Государственные символы и государственный суверенитет».
We have a book titled State Symbols and State Sovereignty, which also includes the words of Confucius, who stated that the world is governed not by laws but by signs and symbols.
Какое-то символьное значение, символическое событие, оно посылает миру огромный.
Therefore, every symbolic event conveys a vast amount of information to the world, shaping certain behaviors.
Все в личной жизни так или иначе сталкивались с ситуацией, когда
in their personal lives, everyone has encountered a situation where they sent a signal that only two people could understand. The act of waving to someone is immediately clear to everyone.
На этой основе построены различные жесты различных криминальных группировок, которые делают.
Criminal groups often use specific gestures to communicate with each other.
Или вот всякие такие вот как.
For example, the Grey Wolves use a wolf salute.
Да тот же римское приветствие.
There is also a Roman greeting gesture that carries political significance in certain situations. However, the raised hand gesture has a historical and universal association with greeting in human culture, regardless of attempts to politicize it. While it may be appropriated for political purposes, its essence as a greeting gesture will persist through changing political landscapes. Symbols are crucial as they draw attention, convey meaning, and are easily perceived. In the past, a field of study called Sovietology emerged in the West during the Soviet era, and scholars would meticulously analyze photographs to decipher the hierarchy and relationships among individuals based on their positioning, proximity, and order on the podium. This detailed scrutiny of visual cues played a significant role in their analysis. The parade is held in honor of the Soviet Union's victory in the Great Patriotic War, also known as the Second World War, over the Third Reich. The Soviet Union played a crucial role in defeating the Third Reich, a victory that the West would not have achieved without the Soviet Union's efforts. However, its role is often overlooked in current discussions.
Кто там пришел, и тем более, что как бы только на победу 50-летия приезжали.
While foreign delegations attended the victory parade for the 50th and 60th anniversaries, its significance has since diminished in international perception. The question arises, what is the symbolism of the parade now? Who emerged victorious in the war? This is symbolized by the use of banners and flags to represent the victorious side. The victory banner associated with the military unit is easily recognizable with its red color. However, the situation becomes more complex when considering the state involved. The Soviet Union fought under the red banner, the original Russian red banner, not the white-blue-red tricolor. Traitors who fought against the USSR Russia were given the tricolor flag by Hitler. Therefore, the presence of the tricolor flag at the parade raises the question of whose victory is being celebrated. This is a significant question to consider. There is a video available on this topic in our Telegram channel and other resources discussing the appropriateness of using the tricolor in the victory parade. What is the essence of this question? If the tricolor had emerged victorious in the Great Patriotic War, Russia would not exist today. It would have been reduced to a colonial territory with a fraction of its population, fulfilling the Third Reich's vision and the aspirations of all the country's traitors. Those who sided with Hitler were essentially fighting to erase Russia from existence. Our enemies understand the conceptual significance of the state's symbols. They were willing to wait for economic reforms to take hold, the military to weaken, or any other setbacks. But their initial demand was for all post-Soviet republics and countries in the Socialist Commonwealth to abandon any Soviet symbols. Let me remind you that the tricolor flag was raised over the country following a coup d'état, without the deputies of the Supreme Council seeking the opinion of the people. The deputies were guided solely by the thought that Hitler himself gave us this flag. If we raise it, the West will accept us. They failed to consider the implications of being accepted by the West, as being invited to the table doesn't mean you won't end up as a dish on that table. The elite in Russia prioritized their ability to travel to the West and gain favor with their masters over the well-being of Russia. This reflects a slave mentality and philosophy within the Russian elite, contrasting with the Russian people, who do not share this mindset. This results in the West facing a significant challenge as it struggles to comprehend the situation in which the elite appears to be loyal to them, yet the country is steadily asserting its sovereignty. They say, "We are certain that they are on our side. They all pledge their allegiance to the West." But the country continues to develop. The West's assumption that Russia is incapable of determining its own future is misguided. Putin emphasized in his inauguration speech that Russia will independently shape its destiny. The Daily Mirror highlighted this by stating, "Putin warns the West that Russians will determine the fate of Russia and themselves." This can be seen as a warning to the West, as reflected in the headline. However, all other media view our elite and our country in the same light. They perceive it as a threat because, after 30 years of blindly following the West and serving as a raw material supplier, the country has now rebelled and is fighting for its own interests. Yes, they recall Putin's speech in Munich in 2007. But what exactly was said at that time? The louse that roared. We'll crush it. They failed to identify the internal processes that were shaping the country and ultimately led Putin to the pinnacle of state power. Therefore, it is crucial for the West to determine who is currently shaping the state's policies: the people who seek to control their own fate and that of their state, or pro-American puppet elites.
У нас памятник Победы, которому были брошены знамена поверженной Третьего Рейха, закрыт фанерой, то есть мы отказываемся от своей победы. Если впереди знамени победы...
The fact that our victory monument, where the defeated Third Reich banners were discarded, is now covered with plywood, symbolizing a surrender of our victory, and the presence of a white, blue, red tricolor flag in front of the victory banner indicates that the country is being governed by Vlasovites, traitors, and pro-American lackey elites, who are willing to submit the country to the West in order to revert it to a mere supplier of raw materials, a state the country is moving away from. This shift is of utmost importance. Organizing a parade is no simple task.
Это должно быть целая серия различных мероприятий, на основании которых можно судить. А получается у подпиндосных элит.
It is important to assess a variety of events to determine whether pro-American lackey elites are undermining Russia's sovereignty. The May 9th celebration left me feeling disturbed.
Смотря на все мероприятия, которые проводились, праздничные, концерты и все прочее, я видел одну вещь. Превращение из праздника...
As I observed the holiday concerts and other events, it seemed that May 9th was being turned from a joyous occasion into a day of sorrow, grief, and mourning. During the celebration of Victory Day, we always remember our heroes and the cost at which this victory was achieved. It truly is a holiday with tears in our eyes. This is how it has been and will remain for centuries. The memory of our fallen should never be erased. On this holiday, we must remember them as if they are alive, standing with us in the same ranks. This is the essence of the immortal regiment.
Но если они сражались против фашистской нечисти, то какое место может быть?
However, If they fought against the fascist forces, then what place does the tricolor, under which these fascist forces fought against Russia during the Great Patriotic War, have in the victory parade, let alone in the columns of the immortal regiment? Do we hold the same honor for those who fought for their motherland and the Vlassovites who fought for the Third Reich to destroy the country? Certainly not. Only our heroes are honorable to us, and therefore there is no place for this tricolor at these events. But let's see what Soviet songs they sing. Notice how in Soviet songs all the words Soviet have been carefully replaced with Russian. It erases the fact that there was the Soviet Union. It was Russia that was at war. Yes, Russia fought, but it fought under the flag of the Soviet Union. To discard everything Soviet is to abandon the essence of Russian identity. When they tell us that the church played an important role in the victory, it misleads people. Did Hitler's army have orders to shoot priests? No. Their orders were to shoot communists and commissars, the backbone of the Soviet system and Soviet Russia. What did our enemies note in their memoirs, diaries, and letters? They noted the resilience and skill of the Soviet soldier, far surpassing that of the Russian soldier during the First World War. Now all of this history is being erased and discarded, with the Soviet Union being dragged through the mud. And from this perspective, was it even worth fighting at all? Why bother? It's a day of mourning and sorrow, it turns out. Let us remember that the individuals who hurried through Upper Lars, now referred to as relocants, consistently insisted, why celebrate? We should mourn on this day. This thought did not arise recently, but has been present for a long time.
Показывают синхронные мероприятия по созданию из России образа фашистской страны.
Current events both globally and in Russia indicate coordinated efforts to portray Russia as a fascist country, externally, and to foster conditions for fascist tendencies within the country.
И, пожалуй, первым, кто конкретно поставил, сформулировал ситуацию, что 9 мая это является день траура, скорби и печали, что Третий Рейх не смог победить.
And perhaps, the first person who explicitly stated that May 9th should be a day of mourning, sorrow, and sadness, due to the defeat of the Third Reich and the victory of Soviet Russia, the Soviet Union, while June 22nd should be a celebration, was Ilyin.
Иван Александрович Ильин. Philosopher, так сказать.
Ivan Alexandrovich Ilyin, the so-called philosopher, and the center named after him, which is led by Dugan himself and has received worldwide PR. He is often portrayed as a representative of Russia and is referred to as the brain behind Putin.
И вот мы уже неоднократно говорили про Ильина, центр Ильина, про Дугина. И, казалось бы, все закрыто. Но события, как внешнеполитические, так и внутриполитические, они эту тему...
We have discussed the Ilyin Center and Dugan before, but recent events in foreign and domestic policy keep bringing up this topic.
А что вообще делают Ильин, Дугин and Company
Therefore, we need to understand what Ilyin, Dugan, and their associates are doing in relation to May 9th. Is this a holiday for them? So, Dugan is a well-known fascist, and he has never denied being one. I have not heard any statements from him to the contrary. He has attempted to justify his beliefs, but he has not renounced his fascist ideas. In 1992-1993, he published the magazine Elementy, and in the first issue, he wrote, "Fascism interests us from a spiritual, idealistic perspective as an ideology that seeks to overcome class conflict in society by emphasizing the national factor." I emphasize, an ideology that seeks to overcome class conflict in society by emphasizing the national factor. We are also drawn to the notions of heroism and self-sacrifice of an almost chivalrous nature, which are integral to the fascist style. However, the totalitarian, repressive, and chauvinistic aspects present to some extent in historical Italian fascism and German National Socialism are completely unacceptable to us. Let me refresh your memory on the definition of fascism in the conception of public safety, and then we can explore how it aligns with Dugan's writings in the inaugural issue of his fascist magazine. The conception of public safety defines fascism as one type of public self-governance culture that can only exist in a crowd, elite, society. What is Dugan talking about? He is discussing overcoming class confrontation in society, that is, preserving the crowd, elite, society. The essence of fascism, regardless of what it is called, the ideas it hides behind, and how it exercises power in society, is the active support by the crowd of little people, according to their ideological conviction, of the system of abuse of power by the elite oligarchy. This elite oligarchy presents unrighteousness as supposedly true righteousness and, based on this distortion of truth, manipulates people's worldview. With all its power, it cultivates unrighteousness in society, hindering people from reaching their humanity. The same oligarchy, under various pretexts, uses all its power to suppress anyone who doubts the righteousness of itself and the policies it is pursuing, as well as those whom it merely suspects of doing so. This definition of fascism is very important as it defines both the so-called Italian fascism and the so-called German National Socialism. This is a general definition, a birthmark, that reveals any form of fascism, which was confirmed by Dugan himself in the magazine Elementy in 1992. In essence, fascism requires a society divided into a crowd elite structure where the little people must obey. But Dugan directly addressed this issue. He explicitly stated, "We must keep ideas away from the masses, only the elites matter." This is pure fascism.
Мало ли, что он там говорил, мало ли, что и как там происходит, да? Но Дугин прямо не говорит же, что 9 мая это...
Some may argue, you never know what he meant by that. You never know what's going on there. Dugan doesn't explicitly state that May 9th is a day of mourning and June 22nd is a holiday. He does. He may express these ideas in different ways, but the message remains the same.
А вот его единомышленник и соратник Просвирнин.
However, his like-minded ally, Prosvirnin, who was a fascist, openly discussed this issue. Prosvirnin's online platform was named Sputnik and Pogrom. According to him, Sputnik symbolized the triumph of the Russian intellect, while a pogrom symbolized the triumph of the Russian spirit. Is a pogrom truly a triumph of the Russian spirit? The Russian world encompasses all peoples and preserves all cultures. Pogroms are exclusively a Western phenomenon. This is a completely Russophobic narrative about Russian pogroms. The pogroms that occurred in the West even culminated in the Holocaust. So, Dugan was in close relations with Prosvirnin, as they were like-minded people.
Так вот, Просвирнин, когда началась активная фаза замещения, превращения 9 мая в день траура и скорби и превращения 22 июня в день праздничный. Эта фаза в государстве
During the active phase of turning May 9th into a day of mourning and sorrow and turning June 22nd into a holiday, this phase specifically began in the state and is designated as June 22, 2012. Prosvirnin published a manifesto of Russian fascists on his website on that day. I won't read everything out, but I'll quote some of it. First and foremost, it's important to note that Prosvirnin pathologically hated the Soviet Union, Soviet society, and Soviet history. However, he also valued Russian achievements. The way he distinguishes between these two concepts is like a kaleidoscope in his head, but that's the essence. Therefore, when he discusses anything Soviet or Red, we must remember that he fundamentally disliked the fact that Russia was saved from disaster. I quote, "We celebrate the 22nd of June as a day of remembrance and sorrow. I don't think this is a day of remembrance and sorrow. This is a day of vengeance." Since 1917, the Soviet government, consisting of Caucasians, Jews, Balts, Asians, and other minorities, along with the most stupid and vile Russian peasants, destroyed the Russian people, Russian culture, and the Russian state. Let me remind you that this resource is called Sputnik and Pogrom. If this is how you evaluate the entire Soviet history, if you hate the victory in the Great Patriotic War, then don't use the word Sputnik. It's not yours. It belongs to the Russian people, the very ones you call vile and stupid. Continuing the quote, on the 22nd of June 1941, white Europe returned to Russia. The sky darkened with planes, the ground trembled with tanks, and the trees rustled with laughter. Hundreds, thousands of ranks of the Russian Imperial Army, who willingly joined the Wehrmacht, the SS, or formed their own units, laughed. The White Russians were coming back to the Red Soviets. Without pity, without mercy, no sentimentality, without a hint of sympathy. All party members were mercilessly slaughtered. Those who collaborated with party members. Those vaguely associated with party members. There was no mercy for anyone. The Soviet scum felt the cold, bony fingers on her throat. Russian fingers. For the Germans, it was a war for world domination and other motives. But for the Russians, it was a war of annihilation. Total. Final. They, referring to those who joined the Third Reich, massacred them, burned them alive, and laughed. They drank the death of the Reds and could not satiate their thirst, the thirst that consumed them, driving them from mound of corpses to mound, from hill to hill, from peak to peak, from flesh to flesh. And there was always too little flesh. The author directly addresses the actions of the Philosovites in Russia, highlighting their relentless pursuit of destruction and death. He then continues to mention that the Reds eventually fought back, which he now regrets. He further states, after 50 years, the Russian dead man will finally crush the red bastard's throat, strangling the frightened bastard, meaning Russia will collapse, the Soviet Union will collapse, and he is pleased with this outcome. Everyone will flee in terror from the horror that has gripped their hearts. The Russian will seize the red throat with his cold, dead hand precisely at that moment, in the summer of 41. June 22nd, on the day of vengeance. This text is a manifesto of Russian fascists. Dugan did not raise any objections in response. He is supportive. However, all of this was based on the works of Ilyin, the very same Ilyin whom Dugan now promotes.
И когда мир смотрит, что у нас государственные программы, концерты идут в русле превращения 9 мая из праздника Победы.
When the world sees that our state programs and concerts align with the transformation of May 9th from a victory day, a holiday with tears in our eyes, but a holiday, into a day of grief, sadness, and mourning, they understand that Russia is on the brink of destruction.
Если удастся еще и сделать 22 июня праздничным днем,
if they can also establish June 22nd as a holiday, which is their goal. And all of this was conveyed to us through various television programs and explanations.
У нас праздник 9 мая, это наш праздник Победы.
May 9th is our victory day, and June 22nd is our day of mourning, a memorial day for the victims who perished in this war.
По всем жертвам, и по воинам, и по мирным гражданам.
For all the victims, both soldiers and civilians, who were killed by real bastards, the Philosovites.
И вот кому более полно интересно по Дугину и его фашизму,
if you want to learn more about Dugan and his fascist beliefs, I suggest searching for the article titled, Can the Philosovites Fight with the Banderites? Online. The answer is clear. They cannot, as they are blood brothers. This article provides valuable insights into Dugan's ideology and activities in the early 2010s. You will find a range of informative materials discussing Dugan's fascist views and practices from a decade ago. There is also an international aspect to consider. How do they try to present Russia as a fascist country? Are there any armed groups within our country that promote fascist beliefs and the idea of racial superiority? No, we do not have such groups. Russia is a multinational country, and our armed forces are also multinational. The military plays a crucial role in promoting interethnic harmony in our country, despite attempts by various ethnic criminal organizations to disrupt this and incite civil unrest.
является стабилизатором, очень серьезным стабилизатором.
The army serves as a stabilizing force, and fascism is strictly prohibited in our country. But what do they do on our television channels? When you see Nazi symbols painted over, whether the RDKs or another groups, do you think it is patriots who do this? No, it's the work of fascists. What is the intention behind this? Evil needs to be represented symbolically so it can be identified.
Вам рассказывают чего-то там, и вот кто-то там такой, но нет вот этой символики, и вы не понимаете, как идентифицировать зло по символам. Вы становитесь беззащитными.
Without these symbols, it becomes challenging to detect and combat evil until it impacts you directly. This is why they hide Nazi and fascist symbolism, to hinder early detection and assessment of evil. It's like taking away road signs from the roads. A sharp turn is coming up, but you'll only realize it when you speed into it. Or, for instance, you'll discover the absence of a bridge only when you drive onto that missing bridge. That's the purpose of symbolism. Every crime should be immediately linked to its symbolism. What do they do in the media? They conceal the symbolism and attribute the crime to anonymous individuals. And then, when criminals do recruitment, they are able to say, well, it's not us, they didn't show us there. We're innocent. And they start recruiting inexperienced youth until they are bound in blood and until people are transformed into degenerates. This is what the prohibition on displaying Nazi symbols on TV and everywhere accomplishes. In other words, it is the fascists who are conducting a propaganda campaign, creating conditions for fascism to take root within the country. Do you think the West does not see this? They see and evaluate it. In the West, did they not witness the victory parade, where the Vlasov tricolor was prominently displayed? The presence of the Vlasov tricolor symbolizes the influence of the Vlasov elites, who harbor animosity towards the country, desire to destroy it, seek to revert it to a mere supplier of raw materials, and aspire to establish themselves as the colonial rulers in Russia. The West, observing the current events, recognizes that these elites are currently in positions of power and are actively pushing their agenda. And finally, considering the negative perception of fascism, why did fascism receive negative connotations globally? With the presence of the Soviet Union and the exposure of fascist crimes to the global community, including the Nuremberg trials, fascism was deemed unacceptable. They always need to claim, we stand for good. Even in the presence of a fascist regime, they must declare, the fascists are not us, they are others. This is how they held Russia responsible for everything. The United States blew up our gas pipelines, but the terrorists are Russians. What specifically did the Russians do? It doesn't matter, they are terrorists. The lack of evidence doesn't matter, they are terrorists. This misinformation campaign is currently underway. Another ongoing campaign aims to portray Russia as a fascist state on the international stage. This campaign is secondary for foreign countries as it relies on Russophobia and does not require evidence. The intended consequence is that this Western narrative may also have an impact within Russia itself.
Что мы видим? На 9 мая Зеленский обращается к украинцам
For example, on May 9th, Zelensky addressed Ukrainians and declared, they celebrated on May 8th, evil has been reborn, and its name is Russian fascism, or RF for short. The term, Russism, is being used to fuel this narrative. Just so you're aware, this image is being shaped in the West, and within the country, people are starting to assess its accuracy. Suddenly, a center named after a fascist philosopher emerges. Remove fascism from all of Ilyin's writings, and there will be very little left. However, his insights on the Russian language and spelling are still worth considering. While not everything he says may be agreeable, some of his thoughts are reasonable. Without fascism, Ilyin's work would lose much of its substance. At what level is this done? At the state level. At what level is fascist symbolism erased? At the state level. Although various individuals on different TV channels are engaged, the main activity takes place at the state level. And they quickly point out, they are trying to hide your crimes by erasing the symbols and blaming them on Ukrainians. The absence of symbols indicates that Russian soldiers are responsible for this, showing Russian fascism, Russism. All of this is aimed at one thing: to foment discord within the country, to alter the Russian people's character. As Ilyin stated, in order for fascism to take root in the country, because fascism is an entirely Western ideology, he explicitly mentioned this, it is necessary to change the Russian national character so that it embraces fascism, something natural for the West. Fascism is unnatural for a Russian. This culture of self-governance is unacceptable for Russia. However, what are Dugan and his associates doing? They are actively promoting fascism, altering the Russian character. They assert, you must fight now, be quiet and accept it. We are here to establish fascism for you. This is used to portray Russia as a fascist country. All of this was fully manifested in the scandal around the Ilyin Center, which was specifically timed for this purpose. Originally, they had planned to proceed differently on May 9th, to present it all in a different light, so that fascism would triumph completely. This is evident in all the prepared concerts, programs, and other activities. When the Zvezda TV channel mentioned, the Battle of Stalingrad is a great victory for the anti-Hitler coalition. Hold on a minute. Where was this coalition during the Battle of Stalingrad? Where? And Lend-Lease still didn't function properly. It was only when they were convinced that everything was over for Germany that Lend-Lease began to work more or less systematically. What was the nature of Lend-Lease? It was dependent on offensive or operational needs. Lend-Lease support would pause during operations and resume once they ended. This required equipment to be repaired and maintained when it was needed for the new operations. This was the way the West provided support for us in everything. Meanwhile, Hitler was granted the full extent of Lend-Lease assistance. They usually remain silent on this issue. However, in the 1970s, interesting studies were published in the West, such as the book, Trade with the Enemy, by Charles Higham, which shed light on this topic. It may be beneficial to seek out a different, less sanitized version of this history for ideological reasons. This is the situation. The enemies of the fatherland, the fascists, are actively pushing for the country's fascist transformation. It was shocking when Gref stated, "Why educate the masses? How will we control them then?" Even more alarming is Dugan's declaration. Ideas should be kept from the masses, only the elites matter. These are clear signs of fascism. They have all the tools at their disposal: television, radio, and mass media, all geared towards the propaganda of fascism. What does Dugan claim? Those who support traditional values are often labeled as fascists. Is this statement accurate? Our fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers who fought against the Third Reich, the pederastic Third Reich, would disagree. It's no surprise that Gorky discussed this in his article, Proletarian Humanism, stating, "Eliminate homosexuality, and fascism itself will vanish." Remember the Night of the Long Knives, when Hitler dealt with Rome, where they were caught right at these pederastic parties. So, did our fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers fight for the LGBT agenda? No, they fought for traditional values. They fought for Russian traditional values, Russian culture, in which there is no place for fascism. Dugan and his associates are trying to impose fascism. This process has been ongoing for a long time. This manifesto cannot be ignored any longer. For them, June 22nd is a day of celebration, while May 9th is a day of mourning and sorrow because their master was defeated on that day. This perception is detailed in Ilyin's writings, which Dugan is currently imposing on society.